Welcome to IFAB Online.
Welcome to IFAB Online.
Welcome to IFAB Online. Hello, everybody. Welcome to IFAB Online, and I hope we have a very interesting session here. We're being joined by, I suppose first I'll start off by saying who I am. I'm Nick Sparrow. I am a fundraising consultant for the past 3 years. Before that, I was Director of Development in Trinity College Dublin, where we really ran the first major philanthropic campaign for the university since it started in 1592. The target was 400 million, and they're about to achieve that this year. I suppose my main skill in terms of what I was doing would be in the major gift area. But now I'm working with a range of charities, small and large, from small theatre groups to hospitals to other healthcare works. So I suppose this session is really about comparing and contrasting different jurisdictions and cultures and peoples and how we fundraise in those areas. And we're really very lucky to have two fantastic people who I met last week, and it was a real pleasure. And I'm going to just ask them to introduce themselves, and maybe we'll go with alphabetically. Melanie, will you give us a blast of what you're at and why you're here?
Thank you, Nick. Yes, my name is Melanie Jackson. I run a fundraising consultancy in South Africa called Words That Count. And I've been fundraising for more than 20 years. And much like you, I think, from one thing to another. And at the moment, I'm also consulting. So I spend lots of time with really different, exciting, innovative organizations that are really bringing about change in South Africa.
Very good. And Norma?
Hi, Nick. Yes, I am based in Buenos Aires. I am the director of also a consulting firm called Into Action. We work in the creative strategy and training areas for organizations in many places in the world. I started also almost 30 years ago working in marketing and then in fundraising as the first fundraising manager for UNICEF in Argentina. And I helped to create the Argentinian Fundraisers Association, and later I was part of the board of the Resource Alliance, the first Latin American there. And well, I go to conferences, I'm a speaker, and I write books. So pretty busy here as well. You're
pretty busy. Very good. Maybe it might be interesting for our viewers to understand a bit about like who you fundraise from. I'm particularly interested in not so much what you're fundraising for. I just think it's more interesting because ultimately all fundraising is a function of relationships, I think, and it's basically it's people who have to give the money. And I'm interested in how philanthropy expresses itself in your society, and what is different, what's surprising, and what's ultimately the same. So Melanie, maybe could you just chat around that space?
Sure. Fundraising in South Africa is interesting. Let's put it that way. We have a fundraising culture that is a product of our very strange history, in that one of the main sources of income for South African nonprofits is corporates, companies. And the reason for that is that South Africa was the first country in the world to legislate corporate giving. And with that in mind, for the last, 20 plus years, we've had a very strong focus on corporate giving. And it's been fantastic because it's a very active sector, there's a lot happening. But at the same time, it's made us weak in other areas, like in individual giving, for example. We are really not good at all. And we really need to build our capacity and our knowledge in that area. But it's a very interesting space to be in.
I mean, corporates are full of people, so they make decisions, obviously. But do you find that you tend to be like working against, you have to satisfy terms of reference in a website, and if you tick all the boxes, you get the money, and it's not really about a relationship. It's just about, just getting the answer right almost.
You're quite right. It's become quite an administrative exercise rather than a relationship building, meaningful in a lot of ways. But we have some companies that are really amazing and go the extra mile and then some. But yes, for many, it's a compliance issue. It's a box to be ticked and we all just move on, which does make it really hard to build relationships.
Yeah. And then, of course, the thing about companies is people move from role to role, and next time you're putting the grant in, you're talking to someone else.
Absolutely. We have a huge amount of movement. I think that is probably true of most countries. And yes, it does become challenging. In some respects, though, you can use it to your advantage because some staff tend to take their beneficiaries with them, which is great, and you get introduced to new companies. But it can also be quite dangerous.
And then maybe we might stick with corporates, actually. So Norma, what's your experience with corporate fundraising?
I started when I started in UNICEF, as I was coming from the corporate sector. I had the job of developing two kinds of audiences. One was individual giving for the first time, which was absolutely new at that time. It was 1993. And we have to develop that from scratch. And also I was working with corporations, but more from a marketing side. And I would develop mainly cost-related marketing partnerships. And at that time also we launched a huge telethon, which is still on. And it was more from the marketing sector side. But after that, I worked also doing some kind of fundraising with corporations, and you have both the marketing side and like foundations and more institutional givers, as in many other places. But regarding to your first part of the question, here we are doing fundraising through individual giving, which has grown quite a lot in the region. And there are countries also that are working really well with major givers as well, with capital campaigns. But it depends on the countries and also on the fundraisers. My preferred area is working with individuals, and I've been a huge campaigner in my region, so that technique started to grow because it was new.
So is philanthropy then a new thing in your area? Is it?
No, I don't think philanthropy is a new thing in our area, but Latin America has a strong connection with the Catholic culture. So giving is strongly linked in many countries with the Catholic culture. So first, people give a lot of money to church, and that happens every Sunday. And then people were more pro to giving things instead of money. And as soon as payment methods were, so we also have a link here in our region with banking systems and payment methods with the way you give, because at the beginning we didn't have that in place. So once all that was improved, technology was improved, payment methods were improved, that kind of giving worked best. And perhaps what was different is the American philanthropy concept, like the more Anglo-Saxon concept. But we do have a huge sense of solidarity here, and the will of people to help. But we also have to combat or to be aware of the sense of huge corruption that people see every day in the papers with the governments, and that sometimes affects NGOs as well.
And but hopefully you're a corruption-free country, Melanie, yeah?
I wish I could say we were. Unfortunately, we've been through the mill a little bit ourselves, and I think that Norma and I, in our chats earlier, we both confirmed that we face quite similar political issues between the two regions. Africa, of course, as a whole, is a bit challenging on the political front. and South Africa is definitely no exception to that. I think that it's a case of donor fatigue for us as well. We've been asked for many, many years now for funding, for assistance, for support. We have the highest Gini coefficient in the world. So our gap between rich and poor is the highest in the world. So South Africans are quite immune to somebody asking for money. We have a lot of people on the streets begging, and there's a kind of like a barrier that one has to put up as a self-defense mechanism, which kind of also keeps away the fundraisers, which is a bit of a pity.
But in terms of that, there are a significant number of people who are very wealthy in South Africa. Does that create a major gift culture for some or not?
I think that amongst our wealthy, it's a very small pool comparatively, there certainly are a very philanthropic bunch, and there's a really strong culture of philanthropy in the more sort of, I don't know how one describes it, upper class, wealthier, those with the cash. Interestingly, Africa has something called Ubuntu, which is quite hard to translate, but the best translation we can come up with is I am because you are. And it's a theory around helping your neighbor, helping the people around you, helping your family, your friends, your extended family. So while there's a strong sense of goodwill amongst the community in South Africa, it's a very informal kind of process. The sense of formalized philanthropy is not always there, particularly when it comes to individual giving.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose maybe I just changed a bit. I remember, I've been in fundraising now for about 20 years in Ireland, and I noted that when I started off, there were an awful lot of Americans with the Anglo-Saxon model, as you were mentioning, Norma, and they came over to Ireland to be fundraisers, to run development offices, and all that. And to be honest with you, it didn't really work. Hardly any of them had major successes. Some of them were fine, but most of them went back to America complaining about Irish culture and how when we say yes, we don't really mean yes. We mean, yes, I understand you, not yes, I give. Yes, I understand you want a gift. That doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily write a check. I might start with you, Norma. If I were to suddenly arrive to work with you, what would I find most challenging or surprising, do you think?
I've met all kinds of people. I met some people who came to our region with their books, and I think they made the first mistake in marketing, which is, to me, the first advice I give to people when I run a training is that never take decisions from your side of the desk. You always have to see who is sitting on the other side of the desk. And to me, that's a golden marketing rule. Know your audience, know who we are talking to. So we have to say that some of those people who came to these countries listened to that rule and they did great. Okay. And the others who didn't follow that rule probably blame the audience for their mistakes. But I mean, I traveled a lot. I worked in many countries, many not Latin American. I actually lived in the UK. But I think that the same rules applies everywhere. You always have to know who you are talking to and how they work. For example, the last example I have about that was Oxfam Spain asked me to help them run a market entry strategy to see whether they could do fundraising in Argentina for taking money abroad. And they really did a good job because they did a very well-crafted study, and we did quantitative research and qualitative research. We tested courses, campaigns, and then after that, after a very long process, they decided to start fundraising in Argentina, and they are doing well. But I think that if you really no matter where you come from, if you take the time and the energy to understand who you're talking to, it should work. I mean, we have examples of SOS Children Villages having great face-to-face strategies in countries like Nicaragua or Guatemala, which are really small countries with not high income, and they were successful.
I think Norma's right in that one does need to know one's audience. But I think coming back to your question around the American model, I don't think South Africans respond particularly well to the American model. I think they find it a little too brash. We always say that if you want to know what's going to be happening in South African fundraising in 20 years' time, then look at America today. I think we're a little slow to pick up on the newer forms of advertising. I think also our costs for things like DRTV and so on tend to be quite high. So we are quite constrained in terms of what we actually have the capacity to do. I think if you had to compare South Africa to another country from a fundraising perspective, I would say we're probably closest to the UK. Maybe Australia and New Zealand as well, being Antipodean. I think that the trick is, Norma's absolutely right, is to know who you're talking to.
Okay. Oh, well,
South Africans find it hard to say no.
Does that mean they just run away from when asked, or they say yes and forget to write the check, or?
It's a combination. I think you'll have people. I've watched it standing in a mall watching face-to-face fundraisers. People literally leopard crawling past them to get away, and then a lot of the times we have people sign up and make the commitment in the sure and certain knowledge they have no income right now and can't make a monthly payment, but they can't say no. They don't want to offend, so that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. So Nick, I'd like to add a tiny little thing about Americans specifically. That Latin America is such a long region. Also, there are countries who are very close to the US, for example, Mexico and the Central America bit. And those countries follow a lot of the American fundraising models. Actually, the Mexican Fundraiser Association is a chapter of the US AFP. So also depends, and those countries have an economy, strongly linked to the US. And so it also, but if I had to say Argentina, Uruguay, and other countries, probably it's more like the European model. But also it depends. For example, I was talking to Harvey McKinnon in Canada, and you know that monthly given in the US has a lot to do with people still paying by check, which is something that we don't do here. So I think we have our own mixes already. So there are no more 2 models or 3 models. I think there are lots of models now. Yeah.
Just, I suppose, while I have you there now, Norma, just how is, if you meet someone, a friend of a friend, and you explain to them that you're a fundraiser, you're in fundraising, how is that received?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that my family understood. Well, my parents now, after 30 years, I think they understand what I do. But I think a part of my family doesn't understand it. I have to say, and especially because as a profession, I am an engineer. So it really breaks their head what I'm doing, working with NGOs and all that, the things I've studied. But probably what I say is that I work in marketing, something called, and even in Spanish, the word for fundraising, there's no one word to say fundraising. It's longer. No, we don't have one exact word. Actually, we use the English one because it's shorter. Yeah. But so yes, we always have to. But now also we have to say that as years go by, we have many more NGOs and many more fundraisers, and it's growing. So, and there's more conscious of the need of working with NGOs, and also the social media have helped a lot. But still, people don't understand that in the NGO sector, people get paid to raise money. I mean, well, that's another issue, but yeah.
I will come back to that in a minute, actually. But Melanie, how is fundraising seen as a profession in South Africa?
Well, the question I most often get asked when I say to people I'm a fundraiser is, and people pay you for that? So I think my experience is probably a bit like Norma's. Even though we have more than 300,000 nonprofits registered in South Africa, it's not something that's very common. And certainly I'm yet to meet anyone who woke up on the last day of high school and said, I'm going to be a fundraiser.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I was at a session once, and I mean, fundraising, obviously it's so essential to NGOs, really. And it was full of directors and chiefs of heads of non-profits, and it was made very clear to them that their real job is fundraising. Where fundraisers are really only the number two in many cases of the fundraising. That if the chief executive isn't taking it seriously, nothing will happen. Just, you said an interesting thing. You both brought it up, actually, and you're paid for that. But is overheads an issue? It's a bit of an issue in Ireland now, when people see the amount of money that charities spend, not in the front line, but on other stuff, whether it's paying a fundraiser or it's paying the CEO or administrators and all that. Does that come up?
I was going to say that when we started with the creation of the Argentinian Fundraise Association, we got inspired by the US Code of Ethics and the model. And it was new to understand that it was a profession and you would get paid for that. I think that in our sector, we still have a huge number of people working as volunteers. You also have to understand that our economies, at least in most of the Latin American countries, are not very strong. We still have huge poverty rates. And so being a volunteer in an NGO sometimes is an undercover way of having some kind of job. So that's one thing. And still, I would say, linked to this corruption idea, I would say NGOs have to work a lot in accountability.
Yeah.
So if you manage to go online and see a well-disclosed annual report. So there are few organizations who show you how much money they invest in fundraising. The ones that do that are more mature and their donors understand it. But I would say that we are a few steps before that, because few organizations show you, and even international ones, I'm telling you, it's really hard to see. So you have this kind of annual report saying, oh, with all this, we raised X amount of money and we help, 3,000 children. I mean, they put the numbers, the figures in the program side, but to see exactly where the money goes, it's really hard. And also it's differently regulated. There's no, in the UK and in the US, you have those places where organizations have to send all their figures, all their compulsory, not here. I mean, you have to have your balance sheet and everything, but it's not online somewhere where people can see that.
Melanie, anything to?
Well, I think, yes, South Africa is probably in quite a similar position. If you are dependent on corporate funding, then very much you'll get 10% towards administration costs if you're lucky. Obviously, individuals are a lot less sort of discerning, and because they're giving us relatively small amounts of money, they're not that worried about exactly where it goes, as long as it goes to the cause. But as I've said, South Africans don't have a very strong individual giving culture. It's something that we've been growing probably since the dawn of democracy in 1994. And I think we're in quite a similar position to the one Norm has described.
Okay, very interesting. I just just sticking with you now, Melanie, for a bit. What are the most popular or the most successful areas for fundraising, in your opinion?
In terms of causes?
Yeah, there's causes, yeah.
Well, children and puppies, they're always the thing.
Lovely puppies.
Lovely puppies. South Africans, though, are very outdoor focused people. They like to be outside. In fact, I have horrible sunburn, which is why I've got no makeup on today, because everything on my face hurts. Because I was outside having a rubber duck race for charity on Saturday in a canal.
Oh, did you win?
So South Africans are, we didn't win, but it was great. It was great fun. South Africans are great ones for the outdoors. So there's a huge connection to the environment, conservation, sort of nature causes, animal causes. And certainly on the individual giving front, those are the causes that we see really standing out. But I think that Norma made a fantastic point when we were chatting earlier this week in preparation for the session. It's really down to the fundraising. Yes, there are some causes that are sexier than others, but it's down to the fundraiser's skill and knowledge that really helps a nonprofit to shine.
Yeah, but I know, like in Ireland, I mean, I listen, except if you have a bad fundraiser, you're going to get nothing. But I suppose in Ireland, we've noticed that the developing world charities are suffering significantly because we've got such a homeless problem in Ireland now that a lot of the charities, I mean, there's new charities sprouting up. I think we've all the time, and they're taking in a lot of cash, much needed. But it's interesting how society changes in that sense. Norma, apart from having excellent fundraisers, what do you think is a good thing to be fundraising for in Latin America?
I think children is like the number one cause. I mean, poverty is the natural cause. I think we have the strong advantage that the need is right to our doors. You don't need to travel really far to see it. When I think that the world is changing, because I remember when I started working in UNICEF had two very different models. You have like the national committees who were raising funds, for example, in Europe. And you have program offices, like, for example, where I was working in Argentina, that we were getting the money. But at some point, there were countries like mine, Brazil, and other countries that were getting money, but they also, because of the disparity, you have a number of people who could also make donations. So we became a mixed office. And at the same time, those national committees were facing new poverty issues, like already 20 years ago, you have poverty in Europe as well. So I think that's a change. So children has been successful, social causes and poverty, I would say number one. But to be honest, the most successful online strategies for Greenpeace had begun here in South America. Then when Doctors Without Borders launched in Latin America, some of us thought that people couldn't give money for other countries, but they did such a great job that people now, I mean, Doctors Without Borders have really, really good numbers of donors, of people who are giving for other countries, even though we have lots of needs here. Yeah. We had severe crisis in 2001, and one of the most successful organizations had a great fundraiser, and he was raising for cancer research. So it's very difficult to say, and I know I think I shared that in a previous call. But for example, in countries like Mexico, you have huge capital campaigns on education. The same on Brazil. So I would say you have like the typical cases, but depending on the ability of their organization to ask. The success. And also, sorry, I don't want to forget that the major campaigns still in the region are for religious causes.
Yeah, of course.
In Brazil and Chile, I mean, those are raising a lot of money, and here as well.
I'd be interested in your perception of the society in which you're working, in the sense that, and how people define themselves or see themselves. And I just reflect a bit on when I was talking to an American fundraiser, that a lot of Americans define themselves by the institution in which they were in. So people are very proud of being in Yale or Harvard or Stanford or whatever the university is, and they define themselves that way. And that's why one of the reasons the universities are so successful at fundraising there. Ireland is not like that. While I was in Trinity myself, and I had a good time and all that, but I don't define myself as a Trinity student. But what Irish people do is we define ourselves by the field in which we were born, in effect, or where we were. It's our location. We are very loyal to the county or the village or the town which we're born, and that would drive a lot of our philanthropic priorities in that sense. That's how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as coming from a place rather than being in an institution. And I'm wondering, does that resonate in any way with either of you?
Funny enough, I'm not so sure from South Africa's perspective. I think that certainly where we see a strong sort of sense of responsibility is from former beneficiaries. If it's a feeding program or a bursary system or something like that, we often see people who have gone through the process of whatever the intervention is that the organization offers, who become donors later in life.
Okay.
And it's quite lovely to see. I'm thinking of there's a particularly large family foundation in South Africa, for example, and their CEO was actually a bursary beneficiary for his medical degree.
Wow.
The CEO of a large organization in Cape Town, South Africa, where I'm based, that does feeding into schools. She was a beneficiary of the school's feeding program as a child. So what's interesting is that quite a lot of the nonprofits in South Africa weave themselves into the community in ways that are very tight and permanent.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of that loyalty and almost a loyalty from generation to generation that gets passed along. My dad supported that cause, so I do. And also linked very strongly, as Norma said, to religion and the various denominations in South Africa, as diverse as they are.
Norma, have you any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I was also thinking, first, still here, not all the people get to a university. That's one point.
Yeah, but yeah.
And so I think it depends on the socioeconomic level. I mean, people who belong to a certain social economic level, perhaps, perhaps they identify a lot with that, with what school, what university you went to, because it's like a club, I would say. But also, I think that in many of our countries, we have a history of huge immigration from Europe, and for example, I don't know, in Argentina, I would say most of the population wasn't here 100 years ago, and most of us are descendants from Europe, from Europeans, and I think there's a pride in the evolution of the generations that sometimes could be linked to what you were saying. But I think people here identify more for where you were born or like the history of family in the sense of the evolution of the family. And in higher circles, it is more like what you're saying, like these club things. But still there's huge disparity. So it's very difficult to say something general. And also the countries are very different. The cultures are, I mean, some countries are more open. I would say also that the new generation of givers are hugely online, are much more open, and they are much more, with a really low life value. They drop from job to job, and they drop from cause to cause as well.
Oh, Norma, so I'd really love to know maybe some insights into what works when you're fundraising and what really doesn't work when you've gone fundraising.
Again, I think that the classical fundraising, the historical, let's say, fundraising techniques in our region have been probably organizing special events, going to institutional givers in some countries, I would say even the government, asking for grants, donations. And then individual giving was the one who was little by little growing. Now, I think in most of the countries, individual giving is getting to a really good level, probably because of the help of international organizations who started launching campaigns. So in the individual giving world, everything was working in our region, online, telemarketing, face-to-face, probably not so much direct mail. Direct mail wasn't working here, but because we really have really bad postal systems. So again, the techniques some have a lot to do with how advanced is the technology in your country, or the banking system, or the payment methods, or and then capital campaigns done the American way worked really well in Brazil, in Mexico. I know also that in Colombia they're working, and also in Argentina, especially for education, universities and even schools. Almost everything is working, but you have to, I always think that you have to create your mix according to your style as fundraiser. Maybe, for example, I never organized a gala dinner myself while I was in UNICEF. And then as a supplier, perhaps we did communication for gala dinners, but I don't like gala dinners myself. And I think that's why I didn't, I don't feel comfortable in gala dinners, but I did organize. Yeah, that's like not my style, that's not my point, let's say. And I think that, but there are people who organize it really nicely, and people get very, smart for it, and they work for them.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of everything. You need to do a lot of testing and adjusting, and perhaps the challenge in our region is that organizations don't give the strategy enough time to grow. So because the boards don't know much about techniques, they think that because they hired a fundraiser in 3 months, there's a kind of a magical thinking that in 3 months, you will be bringing them thousands and thousands of whatever. And of course, we know it won't happen. So sometimes strategies go down because they don't give them the time and the resources to go up.
Yeah. And Melanie, about yourself, what works, what doesn't?
I think I agree with Norma in that it really, for us, it depends hugely on the cause. We have some causes that just lend themselves to corporates. The corporates can't wait to go and do additional things and volunteer there or something like that, because what's quite interesting is that along with this rather evolved corporate giving system that we have, there's an involved volunteering system that goes alongside it. So you have people in South Africa who are experts in corporate giving from both sides of the fence, as fundraisers and as grant makers. So especially though, if your project is educational or linked to entrepreneurship or job creation, those are the major areas of interest that our companies have at the moment, because our corporate giving is also linked to our Black economic empowerment legislation. And basically that is in an effort to redress the imbalances of the past. And if your nonprofit is involved in those kinds of activities, these days you're a lot more likely to be funded by a corporate if you meet one or more of those criteria. I think we have similar challenges with the postal system in South Africa. So it means things like direct mail have not worked well in South Africa for, years. But there's a growing sense of the need for a balanced fundraising basket. It's something that we've always spoken about in South Africa, but we haven't done it. We've been dependent on one or two big donors. We have a national lottery that a lot of organizations became very dependent on. And almost overnight, they changed the way that they made grants, and some organizations closed because they had lost their only source of income. So that knowledge and that understanding of that balanced fundraising basket, whatever combination it might be, as Norma so rightly said, different causes have different sources that work best for them. We try and keep it as broad as possible. I do feel that South Africans are not terribly good at fundraising from individuals. I think it's changing. I think it's growing, and I'm really happy about that because it's a little bit of an untapped resource in the country. But at all times, I think fundraisers need to keep an eye on the fact that you can't be dependent on one or two cohorts of donors. You really have to spread that risk.
Very good. Now, I know we chatted before this session last week, guys, and you both said that you both indicated that you had actually fundraised in other areas than the ones that you're currently working on now. I know your scope is larger than one country anyway, Norma. But maybe would you just tell us a bit how you found going to another culture, and did you find any particular challenges yourself in that, and what did you learn?
First, I have to say that I have a disease. I love traveling too much.
Okay, Jesus.
I am under abstinence now because I cannot travel. Because I think traveling is the way you learn hugely. So I traveled a lot for work and for life, and I've been and also I've been invited in different conferences in different even continents. And I don't know, I always have the feeling that, so initially you go to a country and you have this feeling that there are many things that are different. But now that I am reading and studying a bit more about neuroscience and psychology, because I'm more interested in that, I have this feeling that in the end, probably the 5 or 6 basic principles, because I don't think that marketing or fundraising, have to follow too many principles. I think that the truly important ones are probably 6 or 7. And then the rest are case stories and successful books. But I strongly feel now that if you follow those principles, almost it may work almost everywhere. I have this feeling that people, when I leave a country, I still feel that in the end, what makes you sad or what makes you happy as a person, what triggers your heart and then your wallet, it's not so different, but perhaps the difference is how you express it in a different culture. So once you learn that code, because for example, if you see those ads, those adverts that are on TV online that have gone viral, from this Korean phone company or those that went viral, they trigger emotions everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So I think that if you study a bit of that, I think that people, I mean, if a mother loses a child, it's sad everywhere in the world. Perhaps a Japanese mother won't cry, and a Latin American mother will be crying like hell and making much noise. But I always leave countries feeling that we are not so different. You just need to find a way to package your message in a good way. And I've always been surprised by cases that I had no idea.
Thanks. Actually, that's very interesting. Melanie, are you exactly the same, or did you find any difference when you?
I do agree with Norma. I think she's absolutely right. The fundamentals are unchanged no matter where you go in the world. But there certainly are some countries that are easier to apply those principles to than others. Living in South Africa, we have a very westernized, developed worldview. We subscribe to all of the big Western cultural things. We have lots of travelers, or we used to until COVID. But we've always had lots of international tourists. Cape Town in particular is a very cosmopolitan city, lots going on, lots of contact with the rest of the world. But compare that to a country further north in Africa, and you'll have a completely different set of circumstances. And I think that the favor and good grace of the international donor community varies dramatically as you go across the map of Africa. And I think that fundraisers do find it quite difficult to raise funds in particular settings in Africa. I've had some experience of Namibia and Botswana and a few other countries. And Namibia and Botswana, for example, struggle a bit with their fundraising because they're not seen as desperately in need as one might look at one of the countries coming out of civil war or something like that. And consequently, they're not at the top of the priority list, but their needs are as pressing as might be in any other African country. And I think there's a degree of frustration around more the way that they are viewed as beneficiary countries, as opposed to perhaps the way that one would fundraise in those countries, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I have you. Very good. Well, listen, guys, we're coming to the end. So we've only about, I think, 7 minutes left or whatever. And I suppose I'm just reflecting a bit on what we've chatted about today. It was really interesting. We had chatted about whether, what we were going to talk about, and it would be contrast and compare, and what are the big differences. And am I right in kind of concluding that the differences are not insurmountable? And if you're keen to go somewhere, that if you're an effective, good fundraiser in your home country or your hometown, that there's no reason why you can't be effective. And you could, especially if you've got Norma's disease of travel. And so the last question then I have for both of you is that imagine someone is thinking of traveling to be a fundraiser in your area. Sell it to us. Why should we go, Norma? So why should I think of upping sticks and going to join you and in your work? What's the best thing about it?
Well, the first thing, for example, if you would be based in Buenos Aires and you want to learn about contradictions in the world, I think you would come to the right city. Because you could have, I don't know, the best meals, the best food, the best restaurants, but at the same time, the worst politicians, the worst many other things. I think also something that I didn't mention is that because we speak Spanish, and I have to say sorry for my English during the conversation. Sometimes I was trying to find better words, but I said the disease of traveling, but it was a joke. But there weren't all the books. For example, when I joined UNICEF gave me a training and a package of books. And when I went to my first conference in the US, I felt like a kid in a toy store, in the bookstore, because there were very, very little books of fundraising in Spanish. Actually, there still are very little, and that's some of the things I'd like to do. And so fundraisers here haven't learned the rules first. So the good thing about this market is that because we didn't know what was on the book, perhaps we heard something this, there, and here, people didn't have the prejudice that in order to do online, first you have to do direct mail and then telemarketing, and then you have to ask once and then you have to ask twice. Someone thought, why don't we ask every month? And then most of the NGOs here ask regular giving directly. Okay. Someone thought, I don't know, why cannot we ask online? And then started asking online before. So I think the good thing about this region and the bad thing is that there are no books. So people, so thinking outside.
Good any way you like.
Yeah, I mean, as everything in life, it has the same. It's like, I don't know, dating someone. The same things you like are the things you don't like when you get separated sometimes. But this is the same. So I think that you have the freedom to test absolutely anything, because the rules are not yet very well written and they are changing very fast. So yes, come and try.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, so far Argentina is doing very well. Why should I choose South Africa?
Goodness, Norma, that's a tough act to follow. I think the first thing about South Africa that I think is remarkable, and it extends way beyond fundraising, we are incredibly resilient, optimistic people. If you want to be happy, even in the midst of drama and disaster, come to South Africa. We have an incredible ability to laugh at ourselves and look at the world through rose-tinted spectacles, even when we probably shouldn't. And it makes us pretty good as fundraisers, because you need a degree of resilience and a little bit of rhino hide and thick skin to be able to be a fundraiser in South Africa. But there is so much good going on. There's incredible work going on under the most constrained circumstances you could imagine. There's a bit of a misconception that South Africa is well-resourced and that its people are not as poor as it's made out, because we saw what happened at the Soccer World Cup in 2010. But the reality is there's a huge amount of need. And at the same time, there is this army of amazing people doing remarkable work with so little. It's a pleasure to actually work alongside these amazing people and help make things possible. Yeah. And that's the other thing. We really believe in possibility, and it's a lovely way to live life.
That's fantastic. It seems to be you can. Yeah, that's both areas sound. I won't say which I'm choosing. I'll stay in Ireland for a bit longer, but just really a huge potential in both countries for maybe slightly different reasons. But it just sounds fantastic. Listen, Melanie and Norma, thank you so much for your time you've given to this. I've learned a lot. I hope our viewers have done the same. And with that, with 1 minute to go, I think, according to my records, we'll say goodbye and thanks again. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.